Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to my channel. In this Unreal video, we are going to pick up where we left off in the previous video and turn our daytime scene into a nighttime scene using Unreal Engine lighting tools. So let's get started. Let's start with the same scene. I've already gone ahead and repositioned the camera, so we can just dive right in. We're using the same neighborhood pack done by the artist Dokyo. So make sure to check out the page and see what other scenes are available. I put the link in the description so you guys can check it out. For now, we've got no lights, and I set the display or view mode to unlit so we can actually position the camera and get a good angle. Now, obviously nothing is in the scene, and again, this workflow is by no means the way to go. It's just my preferred workflow. The way that I start the night scene is by targeting the sky. I always want to establish a sky. Now, in the daytime video, we used sky atmosphere. It gives us a clear blue sky. Then we added volumetric clouds, and that gave us a really good result. For nighttime, I have a slightly different approach, which is more of an old approach, but is definitely still valid. And that is to use engine content. Now, by default, if I go to content drawer, we do not have engine content because by default, it's hidden. The reason it's hidden because you've got some really sensitive files in there and they're vital to the engine and you don't want to delete them by accident. That's why Unreal Engine prefers to have them hidden until you manually show this folder. The way that you show the folder, you need to make sure that your content drawer is up, go to its settings and show engine content. All of a sudden, we get a brand new folder called engine, and in that we've got two folders. One is content and one is engine C++ classes. For content, you want to sort of browse and get into engine sky. If I double click on it, I get a folder for sky atmosphere, a folder for volumetric cloud, and then we have BP for blueprint sky sphere, and that's the one that I tend to use to create sky. Now it comes with its own static mesh, which is a hemisphere. It comes with sky material where you can actually go to the instance and play around with the material. You have the ability to change the cloud speed and cloud opacity, and you get sky stars, and with those stars you can change the brightness of the stars. As a matter of fact, the star map itself is in here where you can actually right click on it and show it in Windows Explorer. There it is, T Sky Stars, which is an Unreal asset, and you can replace it with your own map if you want to. So very handy, very useful. Let's drag it in and see what we get. Obviously we don't see any stars because the sun height is pretty high. So to turn this evening-ish looking time into nighttime, all you need to do is just to lower the sun height, and then the stars do appear. Now, whether you would like to have a clear blue sky with stars shining, you can of course increase that if you want to. You can have clouds. At the moment I don't have too much. I do want to bring clouds. I would like to kind of mimic a sort of a spooky night, so to speak. And that really should do the trick for me. We don't have any sun in the scene and nothing is connected to the directional light actor, so I don't need to really worry about it. This attribute doesn't do anything, and if you think the movement of the clouds is a bit too fast, you can always lower the cloud speed to get a slightly different look. I may actually increase my cloud opacity to 1.5. I really like this gray sort of looking color. Now I think it's time to switch to lit mode and see what we have. You can see they're way more pronounced when you switch to lit mode. So I may actually go in here and reduce the star brightness to something much lower, like 0.3 or maybe 0.1. So we do see them, but they're not as pronounced. And now I think what we have for cloud opacity is a bit much. Yeah, that's more like at 1.3. Definitely works for me. Now, with that out of the way, let's bring in moonlight. Now, our moonlight is going to be a simple directional light because, well, we don't have a specific tool to simulate moonlight. I'm going to go in here and go to light and bring in a directional light. Obviously, we really need to work on that. What I try to achieve with directional light is I would like to bring some silhouettes. So I'm trying to kind of move this around to see if I can get a good angle, something like this, and have really nice silhouettes for the trees and vegetations. And of course you can do the same thing. Always look for a subject to pop during nighttime. You don't want to have that direct illumination on the ground. Little bit of it will do the trick. Another thing that I tend to do, especially during nighttime, is to play around with temperature. At the moment, temperature is way too low, which gives that little bit of warmth into the scene. We don't want that. So anything from 8,000 to 15,000 should do the trick. Let's start with 10K. And you can see that immediately brings some cool temperature into the scene. So let's see what else we can do. 10 obviously is way too high for moonlight, but again, we would like to kind of aim for that typical dark moonlight. So if that's what you want to do, I'm going to bring it from 10 lux into probably 2 lux. Still too bright a little bit, maybe 1. Yeah, that should do the trick. So the moonlight is there, but it's not quite there. You don't want to shine it exactly in here and make everything look bright because that can trick the eyes. I may actually go back and just lower the cloud opacity just a tad. Maybe set that to even 1. Yeah, that's more like it. Now we have the sky established. And we have the moonlight. Let's bring in extra atmospheric effects to our scene. Now, the way that we bring more atmospheric or atmos elements into the scene is by using an actor that I actually haven't covered yet. I didn't really use that actor for the daytime. I really wanted to use it for the nighttime so you guys get to see the power of it. That actor is not under light menu, it's under visual effects, and it's called Exponential Height Fog. Now the reason that we call this height fog is because you get more density, more fog in low places of your map, and less density or less fog in high places of your map, which is ideal for landscape. And that's why we call this not just a typical fog, but a height fog, which is quite useful. Now, this height fog comes with, of course, density. So we want to kind of crank it up, but we don't see much right now because there is a really cool element that you can benefit from, and that is volumetric fog. As soon as I enable that, I start seeing some of these gorgeous rays that will shine through the silhouette that we have created, and that adds so much to our scene. Now, I think right now, because we sort of cranked up the fog density, this is a bit too much, so I would like to have a little bit of that. So that's really good. Now, when you create height fog, especially during nighttime, make sure that the fog scattering color has been turned to black color. The default is black, but just so you know, if I were to change this, that changes the entire color of the fog. So that's the direct fog color, the scattering color, which defines fog. That needs to be turned off. There's also another one that you need to be mindful of, and that is directional in scattering color, which again takes care of these indirect lights in the background. If I just use that red color again, we can see that this is totally unnecessary, and we really don't want to have that. The only reason that you may want to have that is to really intensify the fog. I'm sure you've seen moments where you can't really see in front of you because of the fog, and that would be the time to really take that density to the next level by introducing color into the fog. But that scattering comes with its own distribution, so you can kind of completely turn this off or really play around with these sort of gorgeous God rays that you get from the height fog. You can kind of bring that up and sort of have that interesting balance. So I can kind of turn off some of these lower fog density to maybe 0.014, so lower it ever so slightly so we don't have too much fog going on. But you do want to have a degree of it, because you will see that when we get to fill lights, that having that fog really intensifies direct lights inside houses. So that's that. You can see the whole scene is coming together. I feel like my directional light is still a bit too much. So at any point of time, you can go in here and lower the intensity. I'm going to try 0.7, maybe 0.5. Yep, that's definitely better. And you can actually intensify volumetric scattering intensity as well. So if I set it to 2, you can see we introduced a little bit more fog, 3, 4, and look at the background, how it changes the intensity in the background. So what I set was set to 1. I can just set it to 1.5 and see how we go. I mean, at any point of time, I can go in there and change all of these attributes. I think 10,000 is a bit too neutral. I can crank it up to 11K. Let's see what we get. Yep, slightly bluish color, maybe 12. Yeah, that's better. That's more like it. So I honestly would like to create contrast as much as I can, and cooler color as opposed to warm color that we use for light bulbs can really create that gorgeous combination. So you can see we established the color for the sky, then we added our moonlight, and then we complemented with some atmos effects. Now it's time to think about, all right, it's power's not out, we still have lights inside each house. How you're going to strategize that is either based on your brief, based on the reference that you look at. I can spend good amount of time at some really gorgeous indirect lights around this pool and add some really nice artistic lights for the outdoor. I can create some street lamps and make use of that to bring in some light into the scene. But for this particular example, I actually do not have street lamps. If I select one of these houses and look here, you can see we don't have street lamps. You can of course bring one if you wish. Make use of an excuse to bring any type of light to complement the cool color that you have. Obviously, I've got this house right in front of the camera, So I think that's a good excuse for me to bring some light into this house so it gives a little bit of depth into the scene. So let's go to the next chapter where we insert our field lights. Now I've got this house, I can easily go in there, go to lights, and I'm going to use, you can use a spotlight. I'm going to use basically a point light because I think that looks quite pronounced. Now I'm going to use this here, pressing W. Don't want to make it too big, obviously makes it a little bit fake. But again, that will be in the distance. If you feel like this is something that the character is going to pass by, then you got to be a little bit more picky about this. Now I'm going to bring it forward so it's hard to miss, so to speak. This is way too neutral. I want this to complement the cool color that we have in the environment. So definitely I'm going to use temperature and lower it as much as like 4K. Now you can see that warm color. I can even experiment with 2K, unusually warm. Yeah, that is just too much. So 2500. 3000, yeah, 3000 is good. Even I can try 2700, have that happy medium. Now intensity for the volume scattering is something that you can try from the scene that you have. So I would rather not to increase it too much, but just to move back to where I was. So I'm just going to push that back, and I'm intentionally doing this so you see it's right in front of us. So almost there. I'm going to lower this camera and position it exactly where I was. Well, ballpark, of course. And you can see it kind of shows. So whether you would like to sort of have that as is or multiple or scatter it around, if you think the position of it cannot be seen the way you like it, then you can go ahead and sort of change that. I feel like it should go a little bit higher, and I feel like I've got too much fog going on. So maybe, and there are a few ways of doing this, maybe you want to fix your volumetric height fog, or you want to lower the volumetric scattering intensity on your light. So you can see we've got a little bit of details flickering in the background and kind of complementing what we have in this scene. I feel like we can bring this fog ever so slightly lower. We still get a little bit of dancing lights. I can sort of lower this fog as well. So I'm going to try maybe, what is the default? 0.2. I can bring it lower to 0.1, or maybe lower it to 0.05 so we don't kind of get that height fog too high. Just so you know, even the position of this height fog actor can play a role, so be kind of mindful of that. I'm going to lower this one as well. So I think we're kind of getting there, and it's about constant tweak, and you can see I'm constantly tweaking these colors to see if I'm happy with it. So this works well for me, to be honest with you. You can select this guy and hold down Alt and kind of move that around and see if there is any other houses that you can sort of use an opportunity to use that at a slight level of detail. So if I do something like that, we can see we have a little bit of light here, a little bit of light here. We not even may have a house there. It might be directly on the street, but if you feel like you would like to dress the set and stage it in a way that everything complements everything, then you want to take risks on that. Of course, at any point of time, if you feel like, I think I can do better with my directional light, you can always do that. But I honestly think what I have right now is good. And don't forget that you always have Control L at your disposal to tweak things around even more. Like so. So I'm just going to undo for now because I feel like what I have does kind of work. Now, we did take care of the fill light in here. Why don't we take care of the fill light in the house that is right next to us? So let's bring those in. I'm going to use a probably spotlight for the porch or the front door. I'm not even sure if that's a front door, to be honest with you. So increasing the cone, bringing an inner cone, and obviously this is way too much. So I'm going to bring the candela intensity from 8 to 1. Indirect lighting intensity, maybe not as much, and the scattering is not going to do much for me because, well, the height fog is mainly focused on the background. I can probably bring this even lower to something like 0.5. Now I do want to use temperature. Now usually for outdoor lights, you do get cool colors, especially for downlights. So it's good to experiment just to see how they look. We may or may not want to use it. I'm going to use 8K, 10K. No, I really don't like this. So maybe 4K. So I'm switching to warm color, 5500, which is sort of a kind of a neutral color. And again, we did talk about this in our basic introduction to lighting video where I talked about IES lights, so you can definitely benefit from really interesting shapes. So that is available to you even if you don't have vegetation. In that video we talked about how to add a gobo to your directional light and bring in some really interesting patterns to your scene. So always go back, always check to see if there is any way to improve on what you have. Now I think this kind of works. I'm not too crazy about it. I'm just going to press F, see if I can sort of position it better. So bring it ever so slightly in and up. Yeah, that should work. I'm not going to be too picky about it. As long as I have that gradual sort of fade, I think that definitely works. Now I need something for the inside because I do want to get some really warm lights shining on the ground. Again, best way to do it is by using a point light into the scene. I'm going to bring that point light and have that in. As soon as I bring it in, you can see how it nicely shines on the ground. I'm going to bring it up as if it's a ceiling light. And of course, you know what to do. As soon as you bring something like this, always think about temperature. How are you going to use temperature? So temperature, set it to 4500 maybe. I can even bring it lower to something like 4000. It's way too bright though. So you can change the attenuation just to give that a little bit of fall off. Makes it more realistic, adds a little bit of decay. I also would like to bring the intensity down to something like 5, maybe 3. Yeah, 3 definitely works. And I do want to change the radius, source radius. So if I bring it to 5, you can see we get a little bit of softness in here, which does help. Now that's really good. I can bring down the intensity even more. Something like 2, I think, is a happy medium. Yeah, that's better. You can play around with the position, see how you would like to see this. I can actually bring it a little bit here and play around with that. Yeah, that definitely works. It does overlap with the light that we have here, but that's kind of intentional. I want to have that little bit of overlap. Now we are not going to see what's behind us, but I still would like to get some indirect light shining on these chairs because we do have these chairs in the scene. So holding down Alt to duplicate the light that we have, bring it in and push that in. Now you see that cross in here and it says that you've got too much overlap between your lights, but not to worry. We are going to address that really soon. So we get a little bit of light coming in. that definitely works. Again, it all comes down to where you position your camera. If you think the camera is going to walk around, then I would say you kind of need to think about some part of the scene. They're a little bit too bright, but again, we've already established our camera, so I'm just going to bring the camera to where it was, somewhere around here. Now, some of the problems that I have comes from not being movable. So you can see some of these lights are static, and I did talk about static lights that we tend to use movable lights. You can see how they improve the situation. Especially for these lights, I'm going to switch all of them into movable, especially if you've got gameplay going on. During gameplay, you definitely want to be mindful of that. Otherwise, your character won't react to the light, or the other way around. And as soon as I change things to movable, you can see that cross is no longer there. But just so you know, if you want to leave that to static, all you need to do is just to minimize the amount of overlap between each light, and the cross will go away by default. Now, we've done pretty kind of good job on establishing the mood. Is one of the things that I'm really picky about. If I can read the mood, if I can kind of see what's going on here. But there is one more step that I always tend to take, and that is to bring a post-process volume and really look dev the scene. Now, we do have some post-process volume that I haven't touched, and these volumes are in charge of looking after this reflection on the water, but there is no post-process volume for the scene that we have. So let's bring one in and see how we can benefit from it. So to do that, as you all know, we talked about post-process volume before. I'll bring one in. And right now, whatever you do, it will have an only impact on what's inside the volume. You have two options. One is to make this volume as big as your scene. That's too much work. Another one is just to set that to have an impact on like the infinite. So all you need to do is just to type in inf, and you can see infinite, extend, unbound, and I click on it, and from now on we don't care how small or big this volume is, because whatever change you make will have an impact on the whole scene to infinity. Basically, I'm gonna clear up this filter. Now you've got some really cool stuff in there, and we did explore those. For example, exposure is the one of them that I do use, especially during nighttime. I don't want anything to be set to auto. I would like to manually set the exposure. Right now the exposure is not turned on. I would like to turn on the compensation, and I can just gradually bring it up, and that's one really cool way of adjusting the exposure in your scene. Instead of lowering the brightness of your lights, you can actually tweak exposure like so. So I don't know, maybe something like that should do the trick. I'm just going to frame this and move the camera up a little and have a little bit of sky showing. Yeah, that actually works. Maybe I've got overboard with the back light that I have. So let's see which one is the backlight. I think that's the one. And one thing I think I forgot to change is this attenuation is humongous. Yeah, I can kind of have that little bit of decay in there, and maybe just reduce the volumetric indirect light intensity. So I'm just going to lower it to something like 0.6, so it's not really having an impact on the dark areas. I intentionally want some of these pitch black dark areas to remain as black. Again, these are the tweaks that you always go back and forth and make. Let's see, 0.2. I still want to get a little bit of that. I think we really killed it this height fog. I still want to get some of these rays coming, sort of faking the fact that we've got a foggy night, spooky foggy night. All right, that looks definitely better. Cool. What else we can do with that post-process? So if I go post-process volume, apart from exposure, you've got chromatic aberration. Oh, too crazy. So I'm not sure if I want to use chromatic aberration, but gives you really artistic view. Something really cool about that is you can kind of tweak the camera, change the shutter speed or ISO. Well, lower ISO, darker, brighter, higher ISO, so to speak. You hopefully are familiar with cinematography basics of it. Local exposure we don't want to change. Lens flare, very cool for daytime. I think we should have used that actually for our previous video. Well, too late. But what I really like about that is, if I scroll down, is this rollout, color grading. So you can add a temperature to the whole scene. It's really unnecessary at this point, but just so you know, you can give it a bit of a filter, so make the whole thing more of a spooky vibe, like so, or make things brighter, which is good for, I don't know, if you've got a desert, a deserted island, somewhere very dry and warm, you can just intensify that using this temperature. You can give this a tint, but again, we're not going to use any of it. But I do want to use global saturation and have an impact on the saturation just a little bit. That's good. And what I really would like to do is just to tweak saturation on shadows and midtone. So I can go in here and just crank this up a little. If I go overboard, you will see this, right? And actually it's not too bad, but I'm just going to go and increase that saturation for the shadow. You can change the contrast, we can change the gamma. I can actually go in here and say, look, I do not want to get too much shadow, or I want to intensify shadow. You get completely pitch black shadows. So really cool stuff. You can see how much control you have over certain things. Obviously you can change the gain, brighten up this scene, intensify the God rays for your shadow areas. Same thing with midtone, and same thing for your highlights. So you can see midtone really injects color to what you have. Same with gamma, same with contrast and gain, and of course for your highlights. So if you want to increase some of these colorations for your highlights in the scene, you sure can. And of course you can change gain for your highlights, which plays a huge role. You can see how brighter or darker some of these areas do get. If you look at the under the this door right here, you can see we get some artifact if you're not careful. I don't want to use highlights, just wanted to target midtone and shadows. And you've got miscellaneous, where you can just do more color correction. You can bring in film grain and add a little bit of noise to what you have intentionally. Global illumination is set to Lumen, but you can just have that in and have that set to Lumen and change the quality of some of your work. For example, the one that I do use, I'm going to untick the rest of them, is final gather quality, where you improve on the quality of your final gather for your Lumen and get a sort of a much better result. So if you get flickering, if you get patchiness when you use Lumen, that's one way of increasing the quality of Lumen in your scene. Of course, one job that Lumen has is global illumination. The other one is to take care of reflection. Just like I said in the last video, we don't have too much reflectivity, but if you do, definitely Lumen can help you with that. And again, control the quality of your reflection. You can just crank it up to something like 2 or 3. We don't see much of a change here, but this is available, especially when you're inside a house and you're working on art viz and you've got a lot of chromy objects or glassy objects around. So you can see having this post-process volume is a godsend. Sometimes I do spend good amount of time to to tweak this, I'm going to press G to hide all the gizmos and just show you before, after, before, after, to see how much we can sort of tweak the result and get a much better scenario. Again, all of these nodes, you can go back and change them. If you feel like, oh, I need more clouds, you can just make this cloud denser, something like that. And if you would like to change the direction of your moonlight, you sure can. Get more fog into the scene, something like this, you sure can. It's totally up to you, and you've got a high degree of customization. But what is important is how you are doing this, why you're doing this. Are you using a reference? Are you looking at a particular scene and you're trying to mimic it? During nighttime lighting, always pay close attention to the temperature and think about, okay, lights in the scene, but also what's going to happen to the lights that are outside the scene. So you can see, for example, I just made a point light, and that point light is positioned behind the camera because I just wanted to have that illusion of having a light hitting these chairs or these objects from another location, and that gives that sense of depth into the scene. You can see I planted some of these lights in here or in here, and we don't even see them, but they're there. And again, they are quite beneficial to you. For example, if I bring this light, I can actually position it better because we didn't see that as much, but now we do see it. So you can see how some of these guys are super helpful to mimic the nightlife that you would like to create. Another thing that is very important to establish the mood is genre. You always need to think about genre. Is that a happy place? Is that a thriller or horror you try to think about? Is that post-apocalyptic scenario or an environment that you try to portray? And again, we go back to that loop where you need to look at reference and you study how lights are positioned in environment like this. All right, enough said. Well, you can see there is not much to it. You just need to be mindful of some principles and some really nifty tools that you can use. I still would like to spend the time and tweak this, but for now, just the purpose of showing you the workflow, this will suffice. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Stay safe and see you in the next video.